Yeah.
Good evening, Andre. How are you?
Very well, yourself.
All good, thank you. This is Danny Cater from the South African Jewish Report. Thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome.
Dina, thank you very much. Dina is going to be joining in 2 minutes, where we will go live with, we're live now, but we're going to kick off with just some pre-chat and banter. But thank you so much for joining us. Hope you had a good weekend so far.
Yeah, it's been a busy weekend. Thank you, but it's been good. Thank you.
Which you'll tell us all about it during the webinar. Fantastic, thank you. I'm just going to turn off my camera, but Dina will be on shortly. Thank you so much. Cool,
Thanks.
Hi, Dieter.
Hey, Dieter. Hi, Andre. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Dina.
Hello, Benji.
Hi, Dina.
Hi, nice to see all of you. Andre, I know it has been a busy weekend for you, so I'm sure there's a little bit of things going on. So it's lovely to have you.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dieter as well.
Yes, thank you very much.
And Sir Mick Davis joining us from London, I'm assuming.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. Andre, nice to see you again. How are you?
Well, you'll recall, Mick, when we met last, I had jet black hair.
Yeah.
What happened to you running that company? and so Andre, where are you joining us from? Obviously from Johannesburg.
Yeah, that's correct. From home.
Very wet, miserable Joburg.
Yeah, it's good for my lawn though. So counting my blessings. Not so good for coal.
Apparently not. We have heard a rumor about that. So we did see that. And Mick, you're in London right now?
I'm in London, also at home, yeah.
And how's the weather over there? I think we've actually got more rain than you at the moment.
No, it always rains, yeah. So the weather's cold, generally damp. We're expecting a bit of snow tomorrow, but I was still able to do my cycle this morning, so that was good.
Oh, but you're expecting snow. Yeah, I saw that actually. It's beautiful when it actually snows there.
No, it isn't. It really is not.
Much.
No, this country doesn't cope with snow. If you're in Switzerland, you can say it's beautiful because they know how to deal with it. Yeah, they have no clue. So everything shuts down.
Okay. Yeah, no, listen, I lived in New York for a few years, and I have to tell you, I don't think they knew how to deal with it there either. So It is just a function of, I think, weather challenges for everyone. See,
Uh-huh.
Andre, at least we don't have snow. Imagine we had snow. It would be even worse.
Well, not yet.
Not yet.
Give this year a chance.
Yeah, but I see now Europe's going back into lockdown. Italy's gone back into lockdown. It's yeah, not looking very promising from that side. Have you had I don't know about yeah, the vaccine story. So don't worry. So Andre, when you talk about your issues, I know we've got them, but I think Cyril's also got his issues at the moment with the vaccine, trying to locate vaccines, trying to bring them in, and then distribution is a whole nother story.
Well, once again, problems created as opposed to problems foisted upon him.
Exactly. And good evening, Michael. Nice to see you. Welcome.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, good. How's your weekend been so far?
Yeah, I think easier than Andre's. Not too bad, thanks.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, how you doing? Hey, Dieter.
Find yourself.
No, so all of
Yeah,
you
well-
actually know each other, which is fantastic.
No, I don't.
Oh.
I haven't met Andre or Mick.
Okay.
Dieter and I have worked for a long time, yeah.
Glad we could facilitate. Mick and Andre, I think you were at the Mining and Java together recently-ish. We're both speakers.
Together is a bit of a misnomer these days, isn't it?
These days, together is definitely a misnomer.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be like this for a while. So
Yeah,
that's-
possibly. Yeah.
Exactly. And Benji, how are you? How's your weekend been? You didn't go cycling. We know this today.
No, not this morning, but I would have liked to join Mick on his cycle. I was asked, Sir Mick, that you should, Johnny Barron asked me, just send me a WhatsApp that you should say who was the most talented cricket captain at the
He's such a loyal man there.
I'm assuming that takes you back to your PE days.
It sure does. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm also a PE, my family's from Port Elizabeth, so so those wonderful days.
We won't hold that
No,
against you.
no, but we had a wonderful Shabbat, and it was really nice, and we've really looked forward to this because, you know, in the same way as we discussed the vaccine, which however the problem was created, I think we've been so focused on how to help, how to improve, where we're going, and to try and give hope and aspiration to the country of some of these issues that we can try to address. So we're so excited about this panel. Hey, Dina, I know you and I have spoken a lot.
Absolutely. So Andre, our outlook is actually not doom and gloom. We're hoping to see literally the light at the end of the tunnel after this webinar. And I think we have got so much knowledge on this panel and so much input and insight that we're very privileged to have everyone. So thank you all for your time. I know it is a Saturday night. I think that the president actually cut the lockdown a bit early because I know some people couldn't join us because supposedly people have plans. So I don't know when that happened. But I was very happy with the 9 o'clock curfew. It works for me, works for the neighbors' noise. So yeah, a little bit selfish. But I must say that we are hoping that this will be enlightening. Sorry, I keep using those words. And we shall find out a lot. We're going to be going live at exactly 8:30. What we do is just like to get everyone on so we know everything technical is working, get everyone very relaxed, which I know everyone is because everyone really knows their stuff. And Andre, I know you're in the spotlight pretty much all the time, as is Sir Mick Davis, as is Dieter, always getting asked for his opinion on the consulting side, on the power and infrastructure. I don't think there's ever a quiet moment, especially in the last good couple of years. And Michael will be talking obviously on the sustainable side. So I think we've got an amazing, amazing panel, amazing lineup. But Andre, you know what I actually wanted to know? What's happening from a COVID aspect within Eskom at the moment? Because I mean, it must be interesting. It is a hands-on job. It's not that you can have majority of your workers at home.
Yeah, it has affected us. So we have about 19,000 employees working from home. That's not been ideal, obviously, particularly for those people who operate call centers and so forth. But we are trying to cope. But you're quite correct. For a large number of our employees, they've got to physically go out and work on the power stations, on the transmission lines, and with the customers and distribution. So that work's going on. We've had a number of fatalities, unfortunately, due to COVID. So the number now stands at 79. We've got about 19 contractors that have succumbed, unfortunately. But we have to do what we can within the current circumstances. So that's the job. We're taking all the precautions that we can. But the one thing you can't do is to police employees outside of the work environment. And what we found is that, in my opinion, the bulk of the infections actually took place outside of the work environment. There was one particular shopping center at close to Coburg, which was a hotspot, and a number of employees went there and got infected. So this is a very difficult thing to manage if you have people under your control for 8 hours out of 24. You can't control the rest of their lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly been a challenge. I think if you look at the rest of the world, obviously there's I think a growing frustration because people are just going through wave 1 to wave 2 to wave 3. So yeah, it's definitely been challenging. And I think, I mean, you've got, not that you didn't have enough challenges before and then you've got COVID. So, well, in the general scheme of things. So yes, so what we're also going to do is just to remind everyone, please let us know. So we've got a chat obviously within this. We're going to be on YouTube and on Zoom. So everyone, please post your questions into the Q&A section. And Benji, my able board member, my colleague, is going to try and consolidate it because I think we are going to get quite a lot of questions tonight. So Benji's speciality is also putting it all together and making sense of it and looking at the themes so that we know which questions sort of all sit together. So he's going to be helping with that. He's been practicing. That's why he's been training and cycling to get fit for this. And so everyone who's watching tonight, please do put in the chat as well. Tell us where you are watching from. So Andre, I know you haven't been familiar with our Jewish Report webinars, but basically what happened is at the beginning of lockdown in March last year, we thought, well, let's have one webinar with our doctors and try and tell people what's going on with COVID. And 72 webinars later, we are still going. We've talked to absolutely captains of industry across all sectors. We've looked at businesses, we've looked at entertainment, healthcare, fitness. I mean, literally, there are hardly any subject that we have not touched. So this one we knew was really, really top of mind for people. And in South Africa, we obviously have beautiful sunshine, but also people need electricity. So this was a key topic that sort of came up as people wanting to see. So we're very excited that we've got such an established and distinguished panel with us this evening, and lots of experience in this absolutely crazy world that we're living in at the moment. I just want to actually say hello to some people that are logging in. We've got people from Cape Town, we've got people from the States, we've got people from Harder Beer Sport. Cindy Herring says, Johnny Byrne is correct. Sir Mick was the finest cricket captain that PE ever produced. Sorry, that's from Jonathan Herring. They had their own cricket team there with 6 children. Okay, so yes, so we've got Hi from San Diego. We've got Aubrey from Toronto and Etienne. We've got Washington, DC. So we truly have got a very interested audience globally. So even though we think it's a problem related to South Africa, there are lots of South Africans who live overseas who are very vested still in the country and who still want to know what's going on. So it's lovely to have everyone there. We've also got Kathy and Cecil in Sea Point. We've got Atlanta. We've already got some questions coming in. Please, again, put your questions in the Q&A. Let us see what else is coming in. Hi from East London, cousin of Sir Mick. So Mick, I think you've got a lot of family, Barbara Wilkin. So you've got a lot of family that's weighing in and saying hi. And I think that's very nice. Clearly you keep in touch. Are you in South Africa often? Well, obviously when the flights are coming in, but are you generally?
Yeah, I can. I get to South Africa as often as I can. South Africa's in my blood.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Barbara's my first cousin. Yeah.
Dana, can I just ask, sorry, just a technical question just quickly before we start. I'm not sure if everyone's going to be presenting or not. I have prepared some slides. I'm happy to show them or not show them, depending on what's easiest.
All right, so we're also going to have Danny Kedar. Danny, are you there to come up? So Danny Kedar runs our technical. He is the CEO of the Jewish Report. And I'm just not sure in terms of permissions. Can we give Michael permissions to show his presentation?
No problem. Michael is fully able and enabled to share his presentation. Just share screen and share it.
Okay, I'll see how time's going and so forth, and then we can decide.
All right, perfect. I know we do have a lot of questions and a lot to get through, but I do think it will be very, very entertaining and inspiring for everyone, we're hoping, and enlightening. Welcome to SA, Sir Mick Davis from Port Elizabeth. So there's an entire Port Elizabeth gang, apparently, it looks like, that is tuned in this evening to listen. We've got here hi from Pretoria. As mentioned, we will be starting in exactly 1 minute at 8:30. We'd just like to get everyone ready. Steve Dyson from Port Elizabeth, Edenvale. So again, someone from the Wild Coast, haven't heard of that for quite a while. So we definitely have it all happening. Okay. Ivan and Rochelle from Bantry Bay. Simon Weinberg's brother, Mick knows her. Okay. All right, perfect. It is actually just going now on 8:30. So let us begin. First of all, we'd like to welcome everyone to the 73rd webinar of the South African Jewish Report. We have been doing these throughout lockdown. We've had amazing guests, and I think tonight's panel is absolutely testimony to that. We've got experts in the field, people who are really going to enlighten us. André, as the CEO of Eskom, I know that you've had a lot of flack in the media, and hopefully we'll be able to get some real information, plans, ideas from you of where we're going. Wherever all of our guests watching tonight, please post where you are watching from. And if you have any questions, you've got the Q&A buttons, which are below. Please do go and post your questions in the chat, and we will try and get to as many questions as possible. Obviously, there always are a lot, but we will really try and get to them. Please also do check out our website, the South African Jewish Report, sajr.co.za. We have got a new look and feel. It's good for mobile, it's good for websites. So please do try, go have a look. If you haven't got your copy, go to Pick and Pay, go to Discam, exclusive books, and pick up your actual hard copy as well. Danny Kedar, he is our CEO. He is going to be running the tech this evening. And so Danny, thank you as always. You're always doing a sterling job. And I'd also like to thank my fellow board member, Benji Porter, for being on board tonight and helping us manage all the questions and helping make sure that we direct all the questions correctly. And then also to begin, guys, we have got two sponsors this evening, Mantis and GWiz, so we'd like to thank them. And we're going to start off with a Mantis ad. So Danny, please put that on. Thank you. So thank you very much to Mantis. They have been unbelievable sponsors, and we thank them for their ongoing and continued support. So tonight, the way it's going to work is we're going to go through all of our panelists individually, and then we're going to come back for Q&A. So obviously you can post questions in the chat while we're going through it. We can pick them up, and then we'll have a Q&A collectively at the end. So I'd like all the panelists, except Andre, who we're going to begin with, to switch off their cameras, and then we shall begin officially. Okay, so Andre, I think everyone has definitely, there's one burning question that I've been dying to ask you, and I think we're going to start off with that question. And the question is, you're just on mute, I just wanted to let you know. The question is, what on earth made you take this job? You had a perfectly good job at Nampak, you've been in Sasol for 20 years, and you've literally gone, when we say literally from the coal into the fire, you really, really have. What actually drew you to your role currently?
Yeah, it's obviously a tough question to decide whether or not to take a job like this, because it does come with a lot of public attention that I wasn't necessarily looking for. But I think it's also a question of having a purpose in life. You know, what do you really want to do to make a difference? And I had a long conversation with my family about it. Obviously, they are also impacted by the job that I do currently. And the feeling was, you know, we can all stand around the braai and complain and whinge and moan. We tend to be very good at that as South Africans. Or we can actually do something. And I was given the opportunity by being approached to take this job. And I thought, now's my opportunity to make a contribution, give something back to the country.
All right, and you've been in the job for approximately about a year. How do you feel it's been so far?
I think the first couple of months were particularly challenging. Eskom has 11 key risks on its risk register, and by March of last year, 5 of those risks had manifested themselves. So it was a trial by fire to start off with. I think we are making progress. It may not be visible as yet, but we are really doing a lot of hard work in the background to structurally address the issues that we've inherited after 10 years of state capture, in some instances neglect, in some instances I think deliberate neglect of maintenance practices, disciplines like project management, procurement, IT systems. All of those were really worn down to a very low base, and we are trying to rebuild that. So sorry to disappoint everybody on the call, but I'm obviously not a miracle worker. This will take a while for us to fix still.
All right, and in 2001, Eskom was voted the best utility in the world. So how did it go from a position of being literally the best utility in the world to 2008, the beginning of load shedding, to where we currently are today?
Look, I think definitely state capture played a major role. There's an old saying in the corporate world that goes something along the lines of, what interests my boss fascinates me. And if my boss starts to become interested in lining his or her pockets and focusing on projects that will enrich certain families, instead of focusing on the hardcore business of running a power utility, which, as Mick Davis will tell you, is a full-time job and then some, obviously you are going to see neglect creep into the system. So maintenance wasn't done properly at our power stations. We are trying to catch up on that. In some instances, I think very good practices, as I said, were deliberately neglected in order to create opportunity for looting. So our SAP system, which is our enterprise resource platform, was put in a space where it could no longer be used properly for procurement. And a lot of our procurement was done on a so-called free text basis. And what this means is that you can type in any old description of what you want to buy and push through an order. So very early on, I caught an incident where someone was trying to buy a mop with a wooden handle, was the description, for 238,000 Rand. Fortunately, we were able to stop that, but the systems were degenerated to the extent where that was quite possible. And we're still not there yet, but we are shoring up those defenses as quickly as we can.
Now, so that brings me to my next question. So around the corruption. So I know that a lot of people were fired, a lot of people were let go. But what has actually really happened to those people? How have you actually managed that corruption? And what is the plan going forward? Because clearly you can't root out everyone straight away. I mean, we've seen that obviously with government. So what is the plan with that?
So we've already had some successes. Prior to my arrival at Eskom, the company was able to reclaim 1.1 billion rand from McKinsey. While I was there, we've managed to recover some 177 million rand from Deloitte. We've just instituted a claim for some 90 million rand against PwC. We were able to recover 1.56 billion from ABB, an engineering company involved in Kusile. That money was paid into the Eskom bank account on the 23rd of December. So that was a very welcome present to us right at the end of the year. And we had also launched an action against the so-called Dirty Dozen, former Eskom executives, a former government minister, Minister Zwane, and others, including the Guptas, by the way, where we are trying to recover an amount of 3.8 billion rand from those individuals. Now, I'm not unrealistic. I know that most of the money is safely hidden somewhere offshore, and it's unlikely that we'll recover all of it. But again, it's a matter of principle. You've got to ensure that you demonstrate that if you do wrong, there are consequences. And unfortunately, the wheels of our criminal justice system grind extremely slowly. We have lodged a large number of cases with police stations all over the country, but in particular with the Sandton police station. And some of these cases have been outstanding now for years, and we've just not had progress in that regard. So we don't have powers of arrest, obviously, so our avenue is to go after people with civil actions, and more of those actions are in the pipeline. And of course, we've got to fire those that are still trying to enrich themselves at the expense of Eskom in South Africa.
And what do you estimate is still the level of corruption that you still have to root out?
I think at a high level, we've got our arms around it. So the grand scheme of corruption has been halted. That's a thing of the past, and we are now recovering from that very deplorable episode. But at a lower level, we still have incidents of corruption, particularly on the procurement side, where some of our buyers are really still compromised, and we are taking action in that regard. Again, slow process. You can't put everybody up against a wall and take disciplinary action against all of them. You have to respect their rights and treat them properly in accordance with the law. And that's the process that we're embarking on. We're doing lifestyle audits. So if you're a low-level buyer and you arrive at work in your Range Rover sporting a Gucci handbag, then we pick up that sort of thing, and then questions are asked. But it's a slow and laborious process. It's also quite expensive process. It costs about 30 to 40,000 rand per employee to do these lifestyle audits. Now multiply that by 46,000 employees, and you get an idea of the size and scale of this undertaking.
Sure. And also now when we're looking at obviously the previous corruption, et cetera, and everything, did anything happen with, like we're looking at Medupi, we're looking at Kusile, the power output promise from those two plants obviously has fallen way, 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 way below what was actually expected. And it doesn't look like those plants are able now to produce that electricity. Was it a function of corruption? I know there's a misdesign in it. How is that planned? Because I mean, again, that's say we're saying for this round of load shedding, that's what's responsible. So what is the plan, and what was the actual issue with both of those power stations, and how are those going to be corrected?
So the problem really originated back in 1993 when the Energy White Paper was published. And at that stage, Eskom warned the South African government that we were about to enter a shortage of generation capacity. And that duly happened. And at one stage, President Thabo Mbeki was sufficiently graceful to actually admit in Parliament, saying that government was wrong and Eskom was right, and we should have started building new capacity far earlier on. So what was then done was to pursue these two mega projects in a really uncoordinated fashion. And at one stage, we were building even before the designs were complete. Now, you can imagine if you built a house in that way, that the outcome would be less than satisfactory. When it's an extremely complex, integrated industrial plant like a power station, that is going to be even worse. And that's exactly what happened, is that the project management was inappropriate, the design checks were inappropriate, and as a consequence, there were some major challenges in the design that were able to slip through. We have now identified what those design defects are. We have implemented fixes at 5 of the 6 units at Medupi. It's taken us consecutive 72-day outages per unit at Medupi to correct those design defects at a cost of 300 million rand per unit. So this is a major project in and of itself. We are engaged in some very strict commercial discussions with the contractor. And our view is that it's their responsibility to provide us with a functioning power plant, which clearly was not the case. But in the interests of getting more power onto the grid, we have decided to, at this point in time, share the costs 50-50 between us, and we will fix now and argue later, just in order to make sure that we get the power on the grid as quickly as possible.
And what is the timeline for that? Because obviously, I mean, do you understand the frustration? So I know you see it all the time. You literally are at in the firing line constantly. Do you understand the frustration from the South African consumer, from those people left in the dark with no power, with businesses going out for hours and days? And
look,
how,
I think
what is the response to that?
I take load shedding very personally. I can maybe refer you to my wife, who will confirm that when there's load shedding, I'm a reasonably grumpy individual to have around the house. And it's not something that I take any pleasure in. It's not something that Eskom wants to do or chooses to do. But understand that this is not an easy fix. It's not a quick fix. We are living with the consequences of decisions taken in some instances 10 or 15 years ago. We are living with the consequences of really poor management and poor maintenance practices over a decade. Now, you can imagine if you have a car that you have not maintained for 10 years, you haven't changed the oil or anything like that, and by the way, you've run that car in the red all the time, that to then fix that car is a massive undertaking. Now, multiply that across the 81 odd units that we've got across Eskom, and you'll start to understand the magnitude of this turnaround effort to address load shedding. But it's not only about fixing what we've got. We've also got to add new capacity to the grid as quickly as possible. That in a strange way creates an opportunity for private investment to catalyze new generation capacity. And we are therefore restructuring Eskom. We are legally separating our 3 major divisions into the different parts, generation, transmission, and distribution. And the view is ultimately that by the end of this calendar year, that we will have transmission set up as an independent buyer of electricity, because private investors obviously are concerned that they don't want to compete against Eskom bids into the power pool. So we need to protect their interests and their information. So as we are fixing our existing system, we're also doing a major corporate restructuring project. And those of your listeners on the call this evening who've actually been through a corporate restructuring will understand that this is no minor exercise. And at the same time, we are trying to procure new capacity and enable that to happen. So a couple of fairly hefty balls that we have to juggle as we try and limit load shedding as much as possible.
No, absolutely. As you mentioned, you obviously got the major generation issues, and then you're so you're saying you are going that unbundling strategy as per Private Gordon and as per the announcement by Cyril Ramaphosa. And then the question arises, though, this unbundling, does it actually solve the problems, or will it actually create additional problems? And again, with the corporate restructure and trying to manage your generation, absolutely, there's a lot of heavy balls in the air. But when you get to a point, so obviously now you're going to have the unique units, you're going to probably pro-rata your debt. You're currently sitting at about 480 billion rand worth of debt. How do you separate out that debt between those three units?
Well, that's exactly part of the exercise that we're going through at the moment, because it's not only about the debt, it's also about restructuring the tariff. How do you apportion the revenue that we get? How do you sort out your operating model? So we've now designed an operating model. We've implemented the operating model. We have relinked, is the word we used, more than 9,000 employees from a very bloated head office back to the businesses. So our engineers are now by and large back in the power plants in order to assist with the turnaround of the business. So the debt is a major issue that we still need to address. Eskom spends about 32 billion rand a year in interest cost, net finance costs. So that's an enormous burden on us as an organization. And again, that's the legacy largely of two things. On the one hand, the mega projects that we undertook without any equity support at the time from our shareholder. And the other one is, of course, that we have consistently had below cost reflective tariff increases allowed by NERSA. And pretty much like a bulldozer pushing a heap of sand in front of it, the debt mountain has just become bigger and bigger because we've not had the benefit of cost reflective tariff increases.
Yeah, so I mean, talking about the tariff increases, obviously there's been that recent application to NERSA to start actually adding additional tariffs to those independent power suppliers that will actually make them pay for using the grid. And I know there was a bit of an outcry because now they're saying, well, you've told us not to use your power, you've told us not to use electricity, and now we're off the grid and you want us to pay to use the infrastructure. So understandable that there is a bit of obviously a reaction to that. But historically, in terms of the rates that were charged per kilowatt, in 2009, when inflation was about 7.1%, there was a 31% jump in tariffs, and there have been continual rate increases above CPI. How do you expect the South African population to deal with that? Because obviously there's a huge disparity in our population regardless, and the vulnerable always do suffer. So what happens with those tariffs increasing above CPI?
So let me first address the point you made about Eskom so-called penalizing people who produce their own electricity. What we've done is to adjust the tariff to reflect both a capacity charge and an energy charge. What people tend to do is they install solar panels on their roof, but because it's still extremely expensive to invest in full backup capacity, they install a so-called grid-linked solar system. And that means that when the sun doesn't shine or it's been overcast and their batteries are run down, they then want to have the luxury of tapping in to the Eskom generation system and access our electricity. Now, that's fine, and we're delighted, first of all, that they relieve the burden on the grid, and secondly, that they still depend on us to supply them with electricity. But for Eskom to have available as a proxy battery all of our infrastructure, all of our transmission networks, our distribution networks, our power stations, just for the eventuality that your battery that you installed runs down, and they not get compensated for the fixed cost that we incur in having to have all of this capacity available, is incorrect. And that is what we are trying to address. So there's no question that we are trying to penalize people for going off the grid. If you want to go off the grid, there's absolutely nothing stopping you. It is still prohibitively expensive, though, to go completely off the grid. And that's why all of the systems that you see advertised typically are grid-linked photovoltaic systems. They still rely on Eskom, and obviously we like to be compensated for allowing that virtual battery backup facility. So tariffs in South Africa, if you look at international benchmarks, we are still far and away in the lowest quartile of international electricity tariffs. In 1923, when Eskom was founded, the strategy of the then government was to very deliberately use cheap electricity to stimulate industry and enable economic development. Now, that strategy, I think, after nearly a century, has now run its course. And we are now at a point where we need to be able to have either tariffs that are cost reflective, or we need to get a subsidy from the taxpayer. Now, if you look at the hard-pressed taxpayer today, and you look at the other pressing priorities that the fiscus is facing, you have to ask yourself, is it more appropriate for the user to pay cost-reflective tariffs, or is it more appropriate for the taxpayer to divert money from education, vaccines, pick any urgent socio-economic priority that you care to mention, and divert that not only to help Eskom, but actually to help Eskom to pay its interest bill. So the money that we get from National Treasury, the 23 billion rand a year or so that we get from National Treasury, actually does not help us to pay down debt. It merely helps us to pay the interest. Now, that's not a sustainable situation. If you think about Eskom as a business, if you have to borrow to pay interest, that's a bit like a private individual using one credit card to pay the due bill on another credit card. And eventually you go out of business. And that's the point that we are at right now. We've done extensive benchmarking on electricity tariffs. Happy to share the data with you if you want to publish it in your report. And it's clear that even having migrated to cost-reflective tariffs, we will still be in the lower third of global electricity tariffs. And I'm not picking out the cherries in terms of going for the highest tariffs in the world. We really have a broad data set of different comparators. And similarly for our industrial tariffs, significantly below other peer group countries against whom we compete. Before I step off this topic, and you must tell me if I talk too much, but also bear in mind that in US dollar terms, South Africa's electricity tariffs have remained flat since 2007. Now, why is this relevant? Many of our mines and industries export into dollar-denominated markets, where they compete against other companies who have dollar-based costs. So for industry and mining to expect that somehow magically they will be subsidized by the taxpayer in order to remain competitive simply is not a sustainable strategy. Our electricity tariffs in dollar terms haven't even kept pace with US inflation. So we really, unfortunately, have some catching up to do. One final comment, and that is on the cost part of cost-reflective tariffs. We are not asking to be subsidized for our own inefficiencies. Where our costs are too high, where our headcount is excessive, we accept that as a management challenge, and we will fix that. That's the job of me and my team to go and drive down those costs. What we are saying is benchmark us on a global basis against the reasonable, efficient costs of generating electricity, and then compensate us for that.
Okay, and in terms of the debt as well, there's about 34 billion rand, if I'm correct, from the municipalities still owing. How do you intend to actually recoup that?
So it's quite interesting. About 20 municipalities account for 84% of the outstanding debt. So this is not a systemic problem that we've got in South Africa. It's really isolated to a relatively small number of municipalities, but it's a big problem. 34 billion rand is a massive problem. We have come to the conclusion that we can, we've tried to cut off electricity. We were prevented by a number of court interdicts from doing so. And obviously that causes great hardship to people living in those municipalities who pay their bills regularly on a monthly basis. And then for whatever reason, the municipality itself does not pay Eskom its current account. And the problem therefore lies in the municipal administration, not so much in the residents in the municipality itself, or with Eskom for that matter. So what we are doing now is, with the assistance of the Deputy President, who is heading up the political task team, we have developed a model where we will go in to distressed municipalities. We are on the verge of signing a number of agreements with distressed municipalities, where Eskom will actually step in as the agent of that municipality, address the theft of electricity, address illegal connections, ensure that the revenue is collected properly, ensure that the infrastructure is properly maintained, and very importantly, we will collect the money, and that money will get paid into an Eskom bank account. It will not go via the municipal bank account, and it's not because that we don't trust them, but actually we prefer that it, like in the old Monopoly game, don't pass go.
Right to the bank.
straight to our pockets, please.
Don't collect the extra 200 million on the way. Okay. And then, so obviously we've talked a lot about the debt. We've talked about the money. The question is now, so people are asking their questions that are coming in, and we're going to get Benji. I'm going to bring him in shortly just so we can make sure we're collecting all the questions that need to be answered. Although I have touched on a lot of the points. In terms of renewable energy, so a lot of people are asking, is Eskom willing to take it? You've already mentioned that in terms of the independent power producers, that Eskom is willing to take that, and then it'll become part of the transmission where Eskom will actually be supplying, as well as there is independent suppliers. But does that also pose an issue to the infrastructure? Does that need to be upgraded to manage that renewable energy? Because it is ad hoc, because when the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. So what is the issue with it, and what is the plan with those independent power suppliers?
So we think that there's a fantastic opportunity for South Africa to pivot from an electricity crisis to an economic stimulus by attracting investment into predominantly renewable energy. The costs of renewable energy, wind and solar, have come down enormously over the past decade. Israel recently announced the results of a bid round for photovoltaic electricity, including battery storage. And of course, if you include storage, that addresses the fact that the sun doesn't shine at night, stating the very obvious. But that bid round came in at $5 per kilowatt hour, which is a staggeringly low number. That is 60 SA cents per kilowatt hour, including battery storage. Now, that is much lower than the cost at which we can generate electricity using coal. Never mind servicing the capital associated with a new coal-fired power station. So I think that renewable energy is competitive, it's available, it's scalable, which is very important. If you look at the big mega projects that we've tried to build, Medupi, Kusile, Ngula, these are complex projects. They're difficult to deliver. If you look at putting up solar panels and wind farms, it's a cookie cutter. You just, rinse, repeat. You do this over and over and over again. And it's a project that typically can be done on a mass production basis. The one project that Eskom did complete on budget, on schedule, was its Sierra wind farm, which is a 100 megawatt wind farm project on the coast close to Saldanha. And that gives you an idea of the other benefits that you get with changing your tack away from large utility scale production of electricity to a more distributed generation. And the great thing about it is that as we retire our coal-fired power stations, we've got to retire about 10,000 megawatts of capacity, so just about a quarter of our capacity over the next decade. There is significant concessional financing available from green funders internationally who are extremely keen to enable us to make this transition from carbon-based electricity to green electricity. Obviously, bearing in mind that we can't just pull the plug on communities based on coal. We've got to ensure that it's a just energy transition. We have to avert the type of very negative socioeconomic consequences that you saw in the UK, particularly in the north of England, with communities really left destitute when coal mining stopped. So we've got to think this through properly. We don't want to exacerbate unemployment, but we believe that it's really a great opportunity for us to use this crisis that we're currently in and the unacceptable energy supply situation that we currently have, and use that to address a opportunity for creating employment, jobs, and also growing the economy.
All right, so my final question before I bring Benji in is, so where to from here, from a timing point of view? And sorry, it's a double-edged question. So where to, how long will it take for South Africa to have a sustainable power supply? And does Eskom currently have the resources, the skills, and the know-how to get there? So from a future-looking sort of viewpoint, what is the plan?
Dina, before
Yes.
we go on, because actually this will cover the main question as well. If Andre, I hope you're seeing the comments about how grateful people are that you have taken this job, and people sending their support for you. And so I hope you see that and just know that we really are grateful. But I think part of that question is there a metric or a couple of metrics that we can see as laymen, other than just load shedding, that you know that you are making progress, that you are actually winning this war? Give us something else other than just load shedding to look at, and that you're given the freedom by government and the minister to use your brilliance to execute.
So the old question of political interference is a question that I also get asked very often, and I have to say, Minister Gordhan has been absolutely fantastic as far as that is concerned. Is he a tough boss? Yes, he is. Does he ask critical questions? Absolutely. Is he irritated with us? More than irritated. When there's load shedding, of course he is. And who would not be? But I've really operated entirely without political interference since day one. I've not had my decisions second guessed. If I can demonstrate that I've applied my minds, that I've considered all the facts, the minister will say, well, go ahead, do it. So that, I think, is a very important statement to make, because there is a very negative narrative out there about political interference. In this instance, I can't speak to what happens in other entities, but I'm certainly not under the cosh in terms of political interference. How are we going to fix it, and how will we know when we fix it? And I think this is where we as a country need an integrated approach to addressing the electricity crisis. You know, when people hear load shedding, they think Eskom, but they should also think, where is our policy in terms of the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy? Where is NERSA, our regulator? We had concluded an auction process to add short-term emergency power procurement to the grid. And it wasn't a lot because of financial constraints, but it was about 138 megawatts that we could add to the grid. And NERSA decided on Friday that they would not allow us to put that electricity on the grid. So that, I think, we need to address, that there's an alignment here, that we are in an energy crisis and we do need to address it quickly. And I think that the president himself is directly, or not I think, I know that the president himself is very engaged with us, and he is going to give people some marching orders. So I think hopefully with Sona we can hear a couple of pronouncements from the president on that, and see some greater direction and some greater policy alignment. How will we know when we are successful? Obviously, when the lights stay on. I mentioned to my colleagues the other day is that Eskom should actually be an invisible entity. I should not appear on any social media platform or a webinar or on the news. I should be the least visible person in South Africa, because the lights are on and people just don't think about it. You flick the switch, the lights are there. And if you ask me what my definition of victory is if we're able to address our capacity shortage, solve load shedding, if we can make Eskom profitable, and that may sound like a really tall order, but I believe that it is possible. And if we can conclude an overarching climate deal to facilitate a just energy transition that will create opportunities for cleaner and greener electricity generation. So I think those are the major milestones that I've set for myself, and we are working very hard to make that happen.
And what are we looking at from a timing point of view, from a very practical perspective? So when do you envision an end to load shedding, and that the company will actually turn around and we will be able to produce that extra power?
Right. So there are a couple of major milestones that we've got in play. We today are maintaining the equivalent of 2 large power stations that are out on maintenance. And that, of course, as I said when I joined in January of last year, I said, while we do maintenance, and we have to do maintenance, we will increase the risk of load shedding. The alternative of not carrying out the maintenance is that the entire system comes crashing down, which is clearly not an option. So we have taken a very aggressive stance on maintenance, and we have we are in the process of completing maintenance on these 11 units across a number of power stations. Now that's 2 major power stations that we've taken off the grid essentially to maintain. That program will be complete by April, and we will then see a step change in the risk of load shedding. We will then take the second round of units off for this maintenance. We call it the reliability maintenance program. And by September of next year, we should see, September of this year, we should see a substantial reduction in the risk of load shedding. But the risk of load shedding will remain for as long as we don't address the capacity shortage. And therefore, we have made it very clear that we are prepared and willing to do what is necessary to enable new capacity to come onto the grid. We have, in the past, and I think Eskom must own up to this, Eskom was a resistor to new generation capacity being brought on. A number of IPP projects failed because Eskom just refused to sign the agreements. Now, I've made a very clear decision that this is not the way that we want to go. The country needs extra capacity. So, provided we get the concurrence of the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy, as well as of NERSA, we'll do what's necessary to make this happen.
Okay, great. So there is hope. You're saying that there is light. There is going to be some substantial changes coming in. I must tell you, Andre, you are getting a lot of encouragement. People are saying it's fantastic that you've taken on the job. I think there is a great understanding that what you have taken on is no small feat. And people are saying, please don't give up. I know Dita had even mentioned that earlier, saying that they hope you stay, that there are challenges, but don't get beaten down. Carry on doing what you need to do, because someone has to take control. Someone has to take the lead and make sure that those plans are put in place. I think historically what has happened is that there's been these task teams, they've been ad hoc, they fall apart, there's been corruption, and then they all just lose their way and there's no progress. So, and in terms of the unbundling, time-wise as well?
So we aim to have a legally separate transmission company by the end of this year. So again, a very aggressive timeline. Lots of work to be done, but I'm pretty confident on that. Again, you know, in the private sector, to establish a company, you buy from any firm of attorneys a shelf company. We have to obtain approval from our shareholder as well as from National Treasury to do that. So the bureaucratic process, unfortunately, really makes it for quite a cumbersome process. But if we can get all the approvals and all the ducks in a row, then end of the year we'll have this independent transmission system and market operator. And then I think we can demonstrate to private investors that South Africa's electricity generation sector is now truly open for business, and we welcome new investment.
Fantastic. All right, Benji, are there any more questions? I think we can take one or two more questions and then we have to move on to Mick, but we will have a bit of a Q&A at the end just to come back. So thank you, Andre. I think that was very enlightening. I think you've given us, I think a lot of people don't understand what the historic challenges were and the corruption and what you really are facing. I mean, in such a massive organization. So I think you've enlightened us a lot tonight. I think you've given us a lot of food for thought. So thank you very much. Benji, is there anything else that we haven't?
You know, I think you've covered most of it, Dina. And Andre, I must say, we've manned this many, many times, and I don't think I've ever actually seen so many messages of encouragement and support for you. So if you feel alone, don't. I think I think that the one question that, if you could just answer maybe as quickly as you can, is around the neighboring countries. What is our kind of burden towards the neighboring countries, and how do you see that rolling out, Zimbabwe, some of the other players?
So the neighboring countries are actually an advantage for us. You know, there's this narrative that we've provided electricity without getting paid. That used to be true, but we've corrected that situation. We, first of all, buy electricity from Mozambique, from Cahora Bassa, which is essential for our own system. So we are actually a net purchaser of electricity from our neighboring countries. We got a bit lucky with Zimbabwe. There was a drought, you may recall, in Zimbabwe, and Kariba became very empty, and they became very dependent on Eskom for the supply of electricity. They owed us an amount of $23 million, and we cut them off, which didn't endear me and my team to a number of people, but we cut them off. They didn't have the alternative of generating electricity through Kariba, and they paid up very quickly. So the Zim situation is sorted, Zambia is sorted, so there's no more bad debt, and we now operate on a pay-as-you-go basis. So we don't subsidize our neighbors.
All right, fantastic. So thanks so much, Andre, for your input. I hope that you do stay on the panel. We're moving on to Sir Mick now, who I know you've got a long-standing relationship with and has been on the task team as well by Ramaphosa. So thank you so much. We really appreciate your time, and we shall see you shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mick, please will you, there we go. There's your computer. Sorry. Let's just unmute you. So, Mick, so you have been involved as well with Eskom. Obviously, you were an executive at Eskom for a very long time. You were the CEO of Xstrata. You have been in this business for a very, very long time. What is your view on Eskom? I know that you have written articles. There have been articles that have quoted you saying that there can be a turnaround. You do believe that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, as I said to President Ramaphosa when we gave him our report in 2019, that Eskom, as it stood then, and in fact, as it still stands today, is an existential threat to South Africa, to its social cohesion, to its economy, is the present danger that faces the country. And you just need to go back a few years ago, in fact, now many years ago, when there's a blackout in New York City, and you saw the impact of 3 or 4 days when the city had no power in terms of the breakdown of society. So the consequences of Eskom not being able to meet its requirements and the risk of the grid falling over remains high. And I mean, the issues facing Eskom, which André has taken you through, I think very honestly and very effectively, are profound. They're massive. The lack of capacity to do maintenance, the lack of skills, the burden of debt is massive. And there are other issues which he perhaps hasn't mentioned, but which I'm prepared to mention, which is the overriding ideology of the government that things need to be centrally controlled, and the inability of the government to step away and allow effective management teams to do what they need to do effectively. But having said all of that, having said how bad the situation is, it is one of the things in South Africa that can be solved. You know, what has gone wrong with Eskom is a manifestation of bad management, poor investment decisions, lack of skills, corruption, etc. All those things are reversible. What it needs is time and focused input into getting those right, and to allow André and his team to do the work that they need to do, unhindered by political interference, but with important political cover. For instance, in the way that he described the approach to delinquent municipalities, they need to provide political cover for the other tough decisions they need to make about, you know, the extensive number of people employed in Eskom who shouldn't be there to start off with. But yes, that is a resolvable problem. And it's taken 10 years or more for Eskom to disintegrate. It can take 10 years for it to actually get back to being one of the great utilities of the world. But 10 years in the scheme of things is not a long time. And so if the focused plan is put into place now and deliberately executed, I have absolutely no doubt that we will have a utility which will serve the needs of South Africa.
Fantastic. And it's great to get that from you with your history, your experience. It gives us all a bit more confidence. And I know you have confidence in André to do the job. So yeah, so hopefully, again, we are having an optimistic view. This is a once off, I think, that we've seen in this country. So thank you so much. But I know that you also wanted to discuss going more into renewables and the change of what. So we were talking now, obviously, about coal. We were talking about independent power producers and how that's all evolving globally and what we can look forward to in terms of also clean power. Would you want to start taking us through that?
Yeah, I will do that. And bearing in mind, you know, South Africa's challenge is that it's almost an entirely coal-based system. And so one has to recognize, and I think André made the point in both in terms of socioeconomic impact on communities, but also in terms of the capacity to make these changes. The transition of South Africa from predominantly a fossil fuel component of its primary energy into renewables is going to be a slow one. It's not going to happen very quickly. Notwithstanding the fact that renewables have come down, the key to unlock renewables making inroads into the power generation mix is without doubt the creativity of the private sector. So the ability of companies to enter needs a benign regulatory environment without the dead hand of the state overseeing it, a fair and just wheeling charge to allow the energy to be processed through the grid system. And that will unlock the creativity of South African entrepreneurs, which remains high, and will unlock this whole thing of the potential of renewable energy in South Africa. With that new renewable energy, and André mentioned in relation to Israel, is a storage system. Because the one thing about renewable, as you said, yeah, it's renewable energy generally is not in very rare circumstances is consistent. So as you increase the scale of your renewable energy into your system, so you increase instability into the system as well. Now, one of the ways of resolving that instability is to have large base load coming from fossil fuel generation. That sort of defeats the whole objective. So the other way is, in fact, to create very large-scale battery storage systems. And that development is significant. And we've seen prodigious growth in that over the last few years, especially in China, starting now in the United States. And that is something which is going to take over very significantly, which has a very interesting knock-on effect for South Africa, because one of the large minerals that you require for large-scale battery systems is vanadium, because vanadium in the cathode allows for significant storage, and vanadium generally creates battery storage which is non-degradable. and South Africa has very significant vanadium resources. So the whole idea of the world going towards battery storage has an important knock-on effects for South Africa going forward. But if you look at 75% of last year's increases to electricity generation were from renewables. So that tells you the scale of the revolution that is taking place. Now, the reason why that is happening, because there's this international consensus that our carbon footprint in the world has to decline. And, you know, we've had the Paris targets of making sure that we can reduce the increase in temperature below 2%, you know, to get it down by that level requires a sort of a 31% decline in the CO2 equivalents that we produce. If you want to have a target of 1.5%, it requires a 56% decline, and those targets are set by 2030. So the scale of the challenge is absolutely massive. And so what has happened is this international consensus has translated into regulation at government levels. And so what we're having is a revolution driven by government regulation, which is changing the way that people are going to live their lives going forward. And that is the important aspect. And that revolution is creating this massive implosion or explosion of renewable energy. So the world is going to be a different place. The transition to a different type of energy usage in the world is at its infancy right now. And it's going to grow very significantly over time.
So does that mean we must all be listening to and buying Tesla shares?
Well, you know, it's moot whether electrifying motor vehicles actually resolves the problem, because it might improve the air quality in cities. But if the main source of energy used to recharge those batteries comes from fossil fuel primary energy, then it doesn't do much good. So what we need to do is we need to focus in on changing the whole system. So yes, battery propelled motor cars are great. I wouldn't want to venture a spot on which share you should buy, but certainly it's going to see a lot of growth. And the resources which go into creating those batteries are going to see a lot of growth, whether it's nickel, cadmium, lithium, whatever. But the important thing is that the inroad of renewable energy is going to be the fundamental thing that revolutionizes the world and ultimately ensures that we have a world which our children, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren can live in and be sustained in.
Because there are a lot of questions coming in about nuclear, about hydro. What is your view on all of those?
So the challenge for nuclear is this, and I'll make this statement, that everything else aside, if you want to achieve a reduction in the carbon footprint dramatically, convert all your fossil fuel power stations to nuclear. The trouble is that there's no while there's a political consensus that the carbon footprint must come down, there is no political consensus that nuclear is a viable option. And you can understand why, because not so long ago, we've witnessed a number of significant tragedies as a result of plant implosions at nuclear facilities. We'll remember what happened in Japan, we'll remember what happened in Chernobyl. Those of us old enough will remember 3 Mile Island in the United States. A nuclear disaster creates a fallout which has massive implications for society. So it is not easy to get a political consensus. And while we continue to use nuclear fission as the basis for nuclear power generation, I doubt very much whether nuclear will ever grow in terms of its current contribution to primary energy mix. If there was a radical technological change and nuclear fusion became a possibility, then that would change things, because the safety features around the plants would be different. You wouldn't have the back-end issues in relation to the spent fuel, etc. So, but I don't see in my lifetime nuclear being the solution. Hydroelectricity has a role if you've got, if you have the water and the water flow, but you must understand that large hydroelectric projects have massive environmental fallouts of their own. It impacts communities, villages, towns, environments, etc. So producing big hydroelectric solutions has significant environmental implications. And therefore, you have to choose those very, very carefully. I mean, people speak about the hydrogen economy and the fuel cells. Well, technologically, we're not there yet. And I don't think we're going to be there for quite a while. But we are at a situation where the energy transition utilizing battery storage and renewables is, in fact, technologies within our grasp. And that is where we must actually invest our energies.
And where do you see that growth happening at the moment? Is it in Europe? Is it in the States?
It's right across the world. Everybody is embracing this. And in fact, for Africa, I can't see large-scale electricity grids being developed which will satisfy the energy and electricity needs of the burgeoning and growing population of Africa. But I can see actually renewable energy systems associated with large-scale battery storage providing energy, electricity for cities and small towns, which will change the way these people live, will change their potential to contribute to the economy, will change their education solutions, change their productivity. And Africa could then reflect the power of its demographic and become a major contributor to creating value in the world. So I think that there is massive potential for this in Africa. But no, this has clearly been driven by the first world nations of the world, having spent their time when they industrialized, polluting the world, now deciding that they're not going to pollute the world, trying to impose those solutions on third world countries who have yet to industrialize. But nevertheless, that's where it's been driven. So you're seeing it across Europe. You are seeing the United States, always have been, and we'll see more of it with Biden being president. You're seeing it in China. I mean, China is looking to grow its large-scale battery storage systems massively in the next 20 years, 27, 30 times what their current rate is at the moment. So this is a worldwide phenomenon. This is an international consensus, and this is where we are going to go.
And in terms of the relative costs of batteries versus fossil fuels?
Well, it's not the batteries. I mean, it's the alternative energy source you're using. Well, I mean, they have been renewables were very expensive, but in the scheme of things, if you don't believe that is the solution, very few people are going to devote their creative energies to coming up with economic solutions. Now that this has been driven by, as I said, this international consensus and national government regulation, entrepreneurs now have a great incentive, to be part of this process. And so as things have developed in the last 5 years, you have seen the costs of renewable energy come down dramatically, and the viability therefore increase dramatically. And so we are now in a situation where the prospect of having a significant amount of your primary energy mix devoted to renewables is not only possible, but it is real in an economic sense as well.
Fantastic. So I know Dieter Matzner, who's at Investec Power Infrastructure, also has a big view, and he does talk a lot about the green hydrogen. So we're going to speak to him now. But Mick, thank you. Is there anything else you want to add? Because what we're going to do is we're going to go into an ad quickly, just from GWiz, which is one of our sponsors this evening. And then we are going to get into Dieter, because I want him to talk about that renewable, because he does have a strong view, I think, on the hydrogen and the clean fossil fuel and the clean, energy. And I think you'll find that also very, very interesting, although I know you do know Dieter. So thank you, and we shall be back with you shortly.
Good stuff. Okay.
Thank you. So Danny, please will you run the ad from GWiz, and then we will do a poll after that. So thank you very much, Danny. Let us, try and see if we can get Dieter on here. Also, so just sorry, that's from GWIS, obviously very apt in this time and environment that they are selling inverters. And this is a question and a poll that we are asking you. Do you want to receive more information about inverters from GWIS? You can choose multiple options. Yes, I need to buy an inverter. Yes, I'm interested to receive more, and add me to your newsletter. Okay, so we're just going to let people vote on our poll for a little while. Again, it is quite an opportune time to look at one of our suppliers and one of our supporters, GWIS. So please do vote in that poll, and they'll be able to contact you and give you more information should you wish to have it. It is going to be, we'll just leave it on for another minute. Benji, are you finding this to be an interesting discussion?
You know, it's such a hot topic, the electricity crisis. And so to hear the various perspectives and to get kind of the real understanding of the kind of individual who's trying to take us forward is truly inspiring. So that's number one. And number two, to hear the different alternative energy projects that we can get involved in. And actually last year, this weekend, I was away overseas in Dubai, and I met a fascinating person who their sole job was having international energy projects and financing them. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about that. And just the opportunities that were available for entrepreneurs is something that's quite remarkable, actually. So it's a very fascinating and very exciting kind of area in space. Every problem that someone has is an entrepreneur's dream.
Absolutely.
That's what entrepreneurs do. They solve big problems. So this is very exciting.
As they say, never miss a good crisis.
Exactly.
All right, so for GWIS, you can see they've taken advantage of our crisis, and they're getting a lot of people who responded to saying they're wanting to see more info. So there are the results. Yes, I need to buy an inverter, 22%. Yes, I'm interested to receive more info, 60%, and 46% add me to your newsletter. Okay, so I think that's fantastic. So
Dina, I don't know if you saw, but Sekonati posted whether Mick would be interested in investing in energy projects in South Africa. So I would say that if we can make that connection, that would be extremely exciting for us. And we believe in shared value. So as the paper, we certainly would be very excited about that.
Absolutely, indeed. We shared value and creating value. That's what we're here for. We're here to help South Africa and make people positive. And again, to see the light. And with that, we are going to bring in Dieter Matzner, who is an absolute seasoned consultant, a mind of information. He's been in Investec for ages, working in the Power and Infrastructure division. I had quite a long chat with him and was massively enlightened about all his thoughts and everything that he was talking about. So lovely to have you, Dieter. I know you're obviously listening to all of that, and I know you've got so much knowledge that you've got thoughts about all of it. And again, on the green hydrogen. So good evening, lovely to have you. Welcome again.
Yes, thank you, Dina. Yeah, in fact, I haven't been working that long for Investec, only 6 years now. But having said that, yes, in fact, my first job was actually at Eskom in the early 80s. And to Andre, again, thank you very much for taking this job and starting to manage the organization as it was done under Ian McGrain and later on Alan Morgan. I think the next few years you will get this sorted. And as Mick said, this is not an easy job. It takes time to fix, but I'm absolutely positive that the system will be fixed. What I would like to spend a few thoughts about today is just talk about the opportunity actually in terms of what we're facing while we are fixed. We can actually make much more out of it. And this is really on the background that I was fortunate as an engineer to grow up when South Africa, had all these large projects on the go at Eskom, the so-called 6x6 packs. This was about 24,000 megawatts of power stations under construction, although most of them were coal, some of them were pumped hydro. There was the Sasol Secunda plants were under construction. You had the armaments industry, the Atomic Energy Corporation, the steel industry, all these projects, and they created the industrial basis to create the skill sets and the capabilities the country was known for. really was an exciting time. I think a lot of that can be regained actually by focusing on the power sector and the power industry, because what I find is not spoken a lot about is that there are some major trends currently happening in the world, some of which have been mentioned by Mick, is that are intersecting, and we in South Africa can actually benefit from those trends and have all the natural resources. The one, of course, is the whole question of decarbonization. I would like to believe that really in the last 2 years now, the world has really become serious about the whole discussion about fighting global warming. The other trend, which is obvious but is also not always understood that well, is the whole question of electrification. I mean, electrification has been going on as a major trend for the past 50 years at least. It's probably driven by urbanization and the way of life. And then the whole discussion around so-called green hydrogen, not so much the issue around green hydrogen, but hydrogen is most likely to become an important energy carrier. And why I bring this up, and that is something which I think is not discussed and thought about enough in South Africa currently, is that when you look at the energy sector, I'm not just talking about the power sector, I'm talking about the energy sector. Globally, typically, you find that about 50% of all energy is spent in the industrial sector for heating and cooling, like the steel industry, the aluminum industries, and all sorts of refrigeration and heating processes. About 20% is of energy is in the form of electricity, and 30% is transportation, aviation, maritime, road and rail, and so on and so forth. And what we are talking about here is the electricity sector, but it's in fact part of a bigger sector called the energy sector, right? And the reason why I make this point is that as we are busy decarbonizing the energy sector, because that's what will have to happen over the next 20, 30 years. Hydrogen will become an important energy carrier in this process of decarbonization. I'm quite sure and positive about this. And a lot has been written and spoken about this. And I agree, although currently we are not quite there commercially yet. I, in fact, was part of a group who started the hydrogen programs in South Africa in 2005. We tried to use nuclear power to do this, but today renewables will become so convenient and so cheap to make green hydrogen competitively in the next 10 years that I've got no doubt this is the route it'll go. And we can assume that a large part of this green hydrogen will in fact be produced via electricity through electrolysis and other electricity using processes. On top of this, we have, as André already said, you just spoke about the next 10 years, decommissioning of 10,000 megawatts. In fact, the projects I was involved in partly, it's probably around about 20 to 25,000 megawatts. The Kuwait nuclear power station and all these big stations like Majuba, Duva, and so on and so forth, they will all have to be decommissioned in the next 25 to 30 years because they have reached the end of their life. And that basically means that that capacity, together with the whole discussion how to transform the energy sector with making hydrogen, presents a massive opportunity. I mean, just to give you an idea, if you want to put the equivalent capacity of power generation capacity on the grid to replace the current 25,000 megawatts of baseload power in terms of coal-fired power and nuclear power, which will have to be decommissioned in the next 30 years, you will probably, depending on the power mix, you will have to build around about 100,000 megawatts of solar PV, wind, energy storage, maybe some gas in it. And you can just imagine what this means, what will have to be achieved over the next 20, 30 years. If you add to that a lot of hydrogen as energy carrier will be produced using green energy, in other words, renewables, I can imagine that over the next 20, 30 years, we are probably would have to construct something like 200,000 megawatts. Now, just imagine what sort of industrial capacity and might this could create in the country if that's what is to be manufactured and installed. I mean, considering that over the last 8 years in the renewable energy program, which was started around about 2011, 2012, only about 6,000 to 7,000 megawatts of renewable power has now been connected to the grid. The urgency to actually ramp up the construction rate of power capacity over the next 5 to 10 years to at least 5,000 to 10,000 megawatts a year is urgent. And to me, my biggest worry is that this urgency is not really recognized. We are all worried about our load shedding for the next year or two, and I know it's not nice. But the real problem will come if we don't ramp up dramatically the construction of new power generation capacity, as mentioned. And I realize this is a big task. I realize it's a vision which needs government buy-in. What's disappointing at the moment is that the electricity plan, the long-term electricity plan called the so-called IRP 2019, only focuses on what is assumed to be the future power consumption over the next 10, 20 years. What it should do, it should actually look wider to see how could electricity consumption or how should electricity be utilized more widely to actually decarbonize the energy sector. And I realize that companies like Eskom, with its capabilities and planning and specifically from transmission point of view, companies like Sasol as an off-taker, considering that Sasol Secunda works are currently scheduled to close down by 2045 because of the lack of coal and obviously because of the pressure to decarbonize. There's massive opportunity for these organizations together with government to actually push this vision and actually make the power sector a major industrial infrastructure sector of the future for this country. What is also interesting is that most of these technologies today are already mature and they're available. So this is not developing new technologies for the next 50 years and so on and so forth. And a lot of these technologies are already commercially competitive, and those which are not now, they will be in the next 5 to 10 years. You know, we were talking about battery technologies, electrolyzer technologies, as we saw with solar PV panels, as the factory capacity scaled up, they became so cheap. The same with wind turbines. The same will be true for electrolyzer infrastructure to make hydrogen. So I've got no doubt that this is a major opportunity which this country could capitalize on, seeing that it has got huge land space in areas with good wind resources, with good solar resources, and also the need. It can provide the market for this. The other interesting part of this discussion is, as mentioned before, most of the funding for such a program could probably be mobilized from the commercial markets and would not mean government would have to borrow billions of dollars and so on and so forth. So I think with this as background, you know, I'm absolutely convinced that the power sector can be made a major industrial, you know.
So no, listen, I think you're fantastic. I think that's absolutely right, and I think you are definitely you've got the history, you've got the knowledge, and that's why I also want to bring in Michael here, because Michael Goldblatt, so he's at Metier Capital and he's in private equity, and they can also discuss sustainable. So I'm going to take from what you started in talking about your renewables and the whole infrastructure, and again in terms of the whole bigger sector, and we'll speak to Mike, and then we're going to come back to you again with the whole panel for Q&A. Thank you so much, Dieter.
Okay, pleasure.
Thank you. Good evening, Mike. How are you?
Hi, Dana. Well, thanks.
Good, good. So let us begin. I know that you had said that you had some slides to share. I don't know if you still want to share those with us.
Yeah, I think it might be nice to show one or two pictures. Just actually, it's late, and I guess it would be good for people just to see something visual. So if that's okay, I'll just be very quick. and then
Okay.
and then take them down.
Just to give people some history on you, I know you've worked with climate change historically. Currently, you're involved in private equity and funding actual renewable energy, so from solar. So that's why I want to get a view from you on what's happening in terms of PV panels, in terms of sunlight and how much we get, maybe hydro, wind power, just to get a view on what you think, and then maybe you can give us a view on if Donald Trump is right or not on climate change.
Sure. Okay, should I just share my screen quickly?
Absolutely, please do.
Okay. Great. Is that fine, Dana?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, so really, I mean, it follows very much from what Dieter was saying, and it's been it's well, first of all, to say it's really nice to be on this panel with Dieter. I think one of his first forays after he was a nuclear engineer into renewable energy was in one of our projects that we started, and he helped us in the early stages of that project. And I'm going to actually just show a photograph of that project and what he started, helped us start. So it's actually really nice to hear him and be so excited about the future as well. A lot of what I wanted to say has been said already, and I just want to kind of reinforce it a little bit. The driving force for renewables now in the world and in South Africa is now economics. Renewables are cheaper than coal on an energy basis, and we have reached a tipping point in the system. I think, as Andre mentioned, they're also quicker to build and they're modular, which is a huge benefit. It's something that Mick didn't mention when he was talking about nuclear. But the other problem with nuclear is that you can't build small nuclear power stations, really. And you don't know what's going to happen in the future. And it takes you 10 years to plan a nuclear power station and a lot longer to build one. Whereas renewable energy can be built in a very modular, scalable manner, and it's been shown to be able to be done in that way. And that allows you to not put all your eggs into one basket. It allows you to build as you need, and to learn as technology progresses, which is something that South Africa suffered a lot from in the past. A big problem in energy planning is it kind of goes again to what Dieter was saying, is you don't know what future energy demand is going to be. It could be higher than you predict. It could be lower than you predict. And if you've got the ability to build as you need in relatively small units of power, you can match that demand. And that's something that really at this point only renewables provide. So our fund has been investing now in renewables for since 2011. And I thought it was important just to give people a little bit of a history on what's happened in South Africa. I think people may not realize how much progress there has been in the sector, and some of the positives that has happened. So Dieter's talking kind of the future. Andre is also talking about how renewables can fill in our power gap in the future, but that's already started. So I've just shown a map here. In 2011, those little blue dots on the map were the sole sources of grid-connected power in the country, which were all Eskom. By 2018, those orange dots were all independent power producers, all renewable power producers that had come onto the grid since 2011. And that amounted to 200 billion rands of investment that's come into the country through renewables. And it accounted for 85% of foreign direct investment in 2015. And we've got considerable potential to carry on that progress. So just, I thought I had to kind of show a few pictures here. This project on the top left here is a solar thermal project up near Uppington. That's the project I was talking about that Dieter helped us on in the early stages. That's a 50 megawatt project that produces power, and in fact has got storage capability, which is quite unusual for renewable energy projects. It can, and in fact in November last year, operated for 13 days continuously, which is very rare for renewables. This is one of our wind projects near Colesberg. People may have seen it when driving down to the coast. This is rooftop PV that people are obviously seeing more and more around the country. And this is one of our hydro projects that we've done in Uganda. So I'm just gonna stop sharing now. So the point I wanted to make there was that there has already been a massive investment in the country, and we've proven out that we can build and build out an economic sector in the country in renewables. So yeah, maybe just to talk to some of the other points that were being raised earlier is and some of the questions on the group as well. Is what I want to talk about is what this means for households and consumers. What we're seeing now is that we are moving into an era of a smarter grid. We're moving into an era where people are no longer going to only be consumers of power and can be exporters of power. And that opens up a whole set of possibilities. It allows new ways in which we can manage the grid. It allows new ways in which you can integrate power across the grid, and it allows new ways of investment. And there were a lot of questions I saw on the group around people asking, Andre, is it time to buy an inverter? Why? Are we being prejudiced about, being solar? Is Eskom trying to stop us selling solar power into the grid? And again, I just want to go back to something that Andre said, which is that essentially we need to see this as an integrated system, that the time is now where households and businesses can be generators of power. They can put power onto the grid. They can sell power back onto the grid, but we still rely on the grid. We rely on the grid to be a battery. We rely on the grid to transfer power from a generator to a user across the grid. And where we want to be actually is not for people to leave the grid. We want to actually be in a situation where we use the economies of scale of having a grid, but we do use that ability for people to generate their own power and put it onto the grid. And I think some of these sort of tariff responses that we're seeing from Eskom and we're seeing from municipalities are an attempt to kind of try balance that kind of difficult that sort of straddle that sort of difficult balancing act, where they're wanting to keep consumers on the grid and need consumers to pay for that service that the grid provides, but they also are wanting to start encouraging consumers to put new power onto the grid. And we're in a transition process. It's not all right yet. These are new initiatives. A lot of municipalities haven't got these tariff structures right, haven't got the regulations in place to allow pushing back of power into the grid and so forth. But the transition is happening, and it's inevitable. There's no stopping it now. And that we are moving into a new modern energy system. I think we just need to embrace those opportunities. And that applies also to across the board. It applies to low-income consumers. It applies to businesses and mines. And there are fantastic opportunities also that we're seeing at that low-income level. Again, as Mick mentioned, there are millions and millions of unelectrified households across Africa. And renewable energy now, solar power in particular, is providing many solutions for those customers, where you can provide very small-scale solutions to give people light and power to charge phones, to pump water, to have the internet, to watch TV, in a way that just wasn't possible 10 years ago. And it's both a business opportunity, but also it's a fantastic developmental impact that's coming from these kind of technologies now.
Absolutely. So it sounds like our entire panel is all on the same page. So maybe let's bring back everyone. Let's bring back so Mick Davis, Andre, Dieter. I want you all to come and join our panel again. Because it definitely sounds like everyone is all in agreement. It sounds like there is hope, which is actually fantastic for us. I think, Benj, where I know that people are, again, when it comes to power and when it comes to load shedding, people are very emotive and they get quite upset or emotional when they don't have power. And but I think what we've been given tonight is an unbelievable background, an unbelievable view on what the historic challenges have been, what the future challenges are, and realistically where we are, and also to look at alternatives, to look at the independent power producers, to look at the additional supplies. And I think it's created a very realistic picture. So I just wanted to bring in, I know that we had a whole bunch of questions, some of them weren't answered. Benji, did you want to start with some of the questions that we did not get to cover?
So maybe a direct question to Sir Mick regarding the UK, and whether there were quite a few questions regarding whether the UK has privatized their electricity sources, and just maybe talk us through some of that experience.
Well, the UK privatized their electricity generation many, many years ago. So it was one of the Maggie Thatcher initiatives, and so it basically broke up what was effectively the Eskom of the United Kingdom into different components, and also broke up the distribution system, which is also the equivalent of Eskom on the distribution side, and create an independent grid transmission system, which André is speaking about what Eskom has to do. And so essentially generators now bid into the grid, and power companies take off the grid, and you have power solutions offered to different people. And there are a multitude of sources of power coming through from a cable from France, connecting the UK to France, and nuclear power. There's nuclear power with a small amount of nuclear power in the UK, a large amount of wind power today, at times some fossil fuel power, but relatively small, some hydropower, and some wave power, utilizing the wave forces of the sea. So yes, it's been a privatized sector for many, many years. The challenge that politicians face is that because they're no longer in charge of the price of electricity, it becomes a negative political issue in their hands. And so every now and then they're inclined to want to try and intervene when consumers are unhappy about the prices they have to pay. But generally the market forces work well. I think that the one thing I just want to come back to in terms of, and because this leads into André was talking about the restructuring of Eskom into breaking it up into, you have a generation component, a transmission component, distribution component, and that's great. That restructuring is all fantastic, but it does require essentially the system to recognize the integrity of those structures. So it only works if you have real and proper independence, and you can't have real and proper independence if Eskom remains the monopoly generator. And so the growth of independent power generation is fundamentally important to that restructuring for making sense. So in fact, people need to be incentivized, companies need to be incentivized to actually feed power into the system, because that is a way that you actually will get that restructuring to work effectively.
That's a good headway into the next question, which maybe you can answer first, Sir Mick, and then André. Whether in South Africa, we have the engineers, the capacity, the skills to actually achieve it, the different types of kind of expertise that's required to actually pull off the enormous task that André has.
So I'm going to answer the question this way, and I'm really be interested in André's response, because he is much more up to date than I am. That running a power system, running a company like Eskom, is actually not a science, it's an art. And the skill base that you need is people who actually really understand how those generators and the turbines work. And so you need people who have experience in running power systems. Eskom has a deficit of that experience. South Africans have a lot of experience, but a lot of those South Africans are all over the world. They're not in South Africa. So one of the proposals that we made when the task force presented its recommendations to the president was to see if we could actually put together a sort of a proto team of the vast amount of rich experience that we have from South Africans who are operating outside Eskom, in other places outside South Africa, and bring them in and bring them into Eskom and allow them to work alongside the current Eskom employees and basically impart their skill and the experience in a way which we can see that skill, therefore, and experience that we've built up in Eskom. Not to do it on a permanent basis, but essentially to have a discrete project which has a beginning and an end. Yeah, whatever that process is, and to almost helicopter them in. But the one thing that we do face in South Africa, and I think the result was the disasters of the power station projects, which have gone horribly wrong, and in fact contributed a huge amount to the bankrupting of Eskom, was the lack of project management experience. Running big projects is complex across the world. You know, I've built so many large billion-dollar projects, and I can tell you, it doesn't take a huge amount to go wrong for you overrun on cost and overrun on time hugely. So the project management skill in South Africa is nowhere where it used to be. And the one thing that we have to avoid going forward is actually trying to resolve these problems with large-scale projects. We have to think of ways how we can do them incrementally, how you can grow your capacity on a basis where you can add module to module, as opposed to creating massive project risks in these big builds going forward.
Great. And so, Andre, what would you add to that comment?
I think that's spot on. I completely agree that academic qualifications are good. We've got some highly qualified people working for us, but we need people who are skilled in, as Mick calls it, the art of running a generation system. And for that very purpose, we have now launched an operations excellence initiative. We've identified 9 major areas in our power plants, from inbound coal quality to outbound emissions and ash. And we will have experts coming in, so-called greybeards, and so Mick, maybe you qualify as one, to come and walk the plants with the management in order to transfer skill and knowledge in a structured manner. That initiative was recently launched. We've got the blessing of all parties concerned to start doing this. And I'm very excited that this is the right way to transfer that knowledge in a structured way without obviously threatening or being disempowering. That's not what we want to do. We want to transfer knowledge in a way that ultimately empowers and sets the base for a new generation to take the baton forward.
So, Andre, I have to tell you, from everything we've heard from you tonight, it sounds like you're in the right direction. It sounds like all the right things are being put in place, the corrective actions are being taken. Obviously, it's a long journey. The Eskom brand, though, itself has really been battered and bruised. Is there a plan to actually look at the brand building exercise and to communicate these wins? What is the picture on that?
You know, that's a question that I often ask people in Eskom when I talk to them. We've got these large employee engagement sessions, and I ask them, you know, so what do you tell people? What do you do for a living? When you get asked the question around a braai, you know, do you say you work for Eskom, or do you actually just say, well, I'm sort of an energy? And you're quite right, is that the Eskom brand has taken a tremendous knock. But if we can re-energize Eskom and create a future for Eskom as a player in the generation space, fully acknowledging that there has to be significantly increased participation by the private sector. But if we can participate and also create a new future for the company, I believe that will allow us to create an employee value proposition where we can attract the best and the brightest to come and work for the company.
Dina, can I come in here, because I think this is a very interesting question you pose. I just want to remind people that Eskom has been here before. In the 1970s, Eskom was in a very, very difficult situation and went through into the 1980s as well, and they had a commission of inquiry to try and resolve how they were going to deal with the issue. It had the problems were different. It had massive overcapacity. Eskom had overbuilt. As a result, it had a very high price of electricity. It doesn't have the debt problems it had today, but it was overgeared at 700% debt to equity ratio. and it was in a bad way, and it had a very bad reputation and a shocking brand. And John Marie became chairman, Ian McRae became chief executive, and I joined, and shortly after that became chief financial officer. And we not only did we rebuild the brand of Eskom, but we actually obviously rebuilt Eskom into becoming what you said earlier in the 2000s was rated one of the best utilities in the world. But the one thing that we did is we right up front went out to our consumers, both large and small, right across the country. We did roadshows through the little dorps of South Africa and the big cities, and we actually laid out, this is the problem, this is how we're addressing it, and we're going to come back and tell you how we're doing. And every few months, we went back on those roadshows. And the one thing that people appreciated was the consistent level of communication about, there's a plan, this is how we're doing on the plan. And we were upfront when we screwed up, and we told them when we were being successful. And that went a hell of a long way to actually people's growing confidence that Eskom was an organization that could deliver, but more importantly, was delivering for them. And I think that, if it's not happening now, that's the one recommendation I give André and his team, to go out there, actually tell people exactly, break it down into a manageable, understandable presentation. Then you can hit the highlights and now these are the areas we have to address, this is how we're doing it, and go back on a continuous basis and give them an update. And you will find that the Eskom brand will improve overnight. We mustn't believe this is the first time this has happened in South Africa. It's happened before.
It's a great insight, and a lot of what the questions are for practical, insightful comments that we actually can measure, as I asked earlier. Andre, there is one question that keeps coming up, is that there was a program called Back to Basics in the Eskom world, and is that still happening? And that was meant to be a skills transfer. Is that what you were referring to earlier?
We've got a different program, but I think the fundamental premise that underlies the Back to Basics program is something that we need to resuscitate and rejuvenate. Many of our employees think that you can manage a power station sitting behind a desk, and we need to get people back into the mode of boots on the ground, walk the floor, talk to the people actually running the plant, understand what's going on, check, verify, make sure that things are in place. And we are really driving this now with a vengeance. So the Back to Basics ethos is very much alive, even though the program is now going to be structured in a slightly different way.
Yeah. There's a further question on the skills. And maybe Dieter and Michael can come into this on the skills in South Africa in terms of some of the renewable projects, whether practically you believe South Africa, maybe less from a finance banking point of view, but from some of the other skills required, whether you feel as optimistic about South Africa's ability to execute.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, first, can I just say one thing, which is, I think it's very important to realize that Eskom, while absolutely fundamental to the economy and to the power sector, isn't the only actor in the energy sector. And I think Sir Mick is completely right. This kind of transparency and openness and information is really important for the image of Eskom. And we've certainly seen a lot of improvements around that, even around information, for example, around the status of the system and the status of the grid, which is actually incredibly helpful. But
well, the CEO is sitting on a webinar at 10 o'clock at night.
Exactly.
On a Saturday night. It's an amazing
phenomenal.
thing. It's a phenomenal thing.
But a lot of the frustration, I think, that consumers are seeing and people are seeing are driven by some of the other bureaucracy in the system that is outside of Eskom's control. And I think it's very important to recognize that. And a lot of that, in my view, is from the regulator and the ministry at the moment. It relates to planning, to long-term planning, which I think Dieter talked about, and the implementation of that planning in a timeous way. We've been sitting since 2015, essentially, with a plan that in many respects is correct about putting renewables onto the grid, and with a program that's proven that it can work. And now we have an Eskom that's receptive to that program and has explicitly said they're open to helping that program happen. But we're not seeing the gates being opened by government and by the energy regulator to allow that program to happen. And that's really outside of Eskom's control. And so people often conflate that because they see Eskom as the sector. And the other element is that Eskom doesn't deliver power to people in municipalities directly. People sitting in houses and businesses, half of them at least, are not delivered power directly by Eskom. They deliver power through municipalities, who also have control of tariffs, who also need to maintain their distribution systems and often aren't doing that adequately. So a lot of what people see as load shedding is actually not load shedding. It's municipal networks not being as robust as they should be. And I think that kind of information is also very important for people to understand, because it kind of shows that the system is more complicated, and therefore some of the solutions are going to be a bit more complicated. And that's not to say that some municipalities aren't trying as well. There are many municipalities who are now looking at putting in net metering, allowing consumers to feed back into the grid, looking at incentives for getting power onto the grid. But then, sorry, Benji, to get back to your specific question, I also let Dieter talk, is, look, we've now been involved in 8 large-scale renewable projects in South Africa, one 5.5 billion rand project, another 11 billion rand project, both of them built on time, pretty much on budget. And a lot of the skills for that are not South African. Many of those skills have been from large contractors who've come from international firms. But a lot of those skills have been South African. Unfortunately, I'd say quite a few of those skilled staff are from Eskom themselves. Eskom's lost a lot of staff to the renewables program. I'm hoping it's a bit of a revolving door. I hope a lot of those people have gained a lot of skills from in terms of project management, in terms of the renewable energy sector. And we'll go back to Eskom as Eskom becomes a better organization to work for, and as Eskom itself starts getting into the renewable space. So I do think we are rebuilding some of that capacity, and maybe in a more appropriate way, in a way that's not only around coal stations, but around, as André said, smaller, more modular renewable stations. And we are seeing, certainly in our projects, we've seen a fantastic cohort of young engineers coming through who've learned an enormous amount about new technology from the leading construction companies in the world. And I think that must be good for the country.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Dieter, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think, I just cannot strongly enough underline the whole importance of putting a long-term plan in place and really sticking to it, right? This has been so devastating for the industry over the last 6 years, not having been continuing with this very successful independent power producer program. I mean, the country was lauded for the rollout of this program, and it was exemplary because it was one of the first programs in the world which was actually bidding renewable power, right? Every other country was setting tariffs where Africa went out and said, we're going to bid this, right? And it went really well until the program stopped end of 2015. And it decimated many of the local manufacturing industries. It had a severe effect on the construction industries, as Michael said just now. A lot of these projects are now managed by international contractors, which could have easily been managed by previous capabilities of South African contractors. And I hope we can rebuild this with local skills and local manufacturing capacity. But then it needs one thing. It needs consistency and stability in the plan going forward. I looked very carefully for a long period of time on how the South Koreans built their industry up. It was specifically on the nuclear industry, and you've got to have this continuous deployment of power generation, and that's why I'm pleading for this. That you can't have this intermittency and doing a couple of thousand megawatts here and then this and then that and then you stop for 5 years. You have to be consistent, right? And it's also to make people believe that you're serious about this. Now, if we can get that right, I think the future is bright.
Fantastic. All right. So we have been at it for quite a while already. You've all been patient. You've given us so much information. We thank you so much. Dieter, maybe while we're actually with you, let's start on closing comments just for the webinar. What would you say just as a closing comment and closing thought on everything we've discussed tonight?
Well, I would appreciate if Andre, having the benefit of access to the political establishment, could start putting this vision forward of thinking wider than just the electricity sector, the power sector, and actually starting to look at the energy sector, because that's what ultimately needs to be decarbonized, because that, in my view, provides a huge opportunity for the power sector as well.
Thank you. And we'll go back in reverse order. Mike, your closing comments.
No, I guess just a small thing is that one of the ways in which Eskom can be helped in the short term to meet this supply gap that's got is through embedded generation, through consumers, through independent power producers being able to supply consumers directly themselves, because that can be done much faster than Eskom can repair its system and can put large scale capacity onto the grid. And I think a key there is just getting rid of the regulatory barriers, the red tape that's stopping that happening. I know Eskom's now in support of that. Our president has said he's in support of that, but it's not yet happening. But I think if that can happen, it can open the floodgates to kind of power quickly being put on the grid, which will help Eskom. It will help the construction sector. And I think it will introduce a lot of confidence into the sector into the short term. So that's kind of what I'm hoping we'll see in the next year or two.
But no small feat at all. Okay, thank you so much, Mike. Thank you for your contribution as well. So, Mick.
Yes, well, I think you've heard from all the panelists some very interesting perspectives, and I want to underline that I agree with them that the growth of independent power production is a fundamental part of the solution for the power shortage in South Africa. And the reality is that you either create the reserve for Eskom to rehabilitate its power units by having increased generation from other sources, or from cutting the load, and you don't want to do that because that's reflective in an economy which is spiraling down. So I think that is an important component of it, and quite rightly, this is one of the frustrations where government regulation and ideology of central control inhibits this from happening. And so this is my point, that you've heard from Eskom's current chief executive a coherent plan and a commitment to get this right. He needs the political establishment to create the arrangements that will allow that to happen. The political establishment will only create the arrangements if the people demand it. And so when you get angry and frustrated about, power outages and things like that, don't focus your anger so much on Andre and Eskom. Focus your anger and your energies on the political establishment creating the right arrangements that the right things can be done at Eskom.
That's a great summary, I think, and I think Andre thanks you for that on his behalf. So Andre, yes, the man who generally is in the spotlight and under the firing lines, give us your last sentiments and words on this topic.
Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity. First of all, thanks also for the messages of support on the chat group, and it's great to share this forum with so many distinguished panelists. I think that we have an opportunity in South Africa to turn this crisis into an opportunity not only to decarbonize, but to attract investment, to reindustrialize. But Mick is absolutely right. It needs a blend of smart, targeted policies that will enable and support it and be consistent, to Dieter's point, for a long period of time, that there's predictability in the policy environment. And if we can get that right, we can really turn this negative situation that we find ourselves in into an opportunity where we can create something that, for a change, can't be exported to China.
Fantastic. And Ben, just my colleague and co-board member, thank you for helping field all the questions. I know we probably haven't got through all of them, but you've done a great job in consolidating. Would you like to have a word in summary on this?
You know, I thought that Mick's insight that this is not something new, the Eskom brand issues and how they addressed it, is something so important for us to actually remember, that sometimes we get caught that this is the only time in history that anything happens. And to see this level of panel here and all sharing their expertise is something wonderful for our community. But to see the CEO of Eskom sitting here 10:15, 10:20 at night, having an open panel, open chat room, we got no demands of to not have something open and to shut this down or shut that down, and to take these questions so openly and honestly is actually probably the greatest insight that we can all have. And just to thank the group and the panel, and to thank Andre, and we support you, and we back you as a community, and we thank you for your efforts.
Absolutely, and I couldn't even, I'll just echo everything that Benji said. I think, I mean, we've had thousands of viewers watching this evening. We've had a huge interest in this topic. And I think that, again, the candor with which you answered all the questions and the insights from Sir Mick and from Dita and from Mike, I think it really has added an array of hope. It shows that there is a plan, there is something going on. Again, maybe Eskom does need to work on its PR to say, look, guys, there is progress. We have a plan. We're making inroads, and it does look brighter, and the future looks good. So thank you so much for your time. To our viewers, please, if you have enjoyed the webinar, please feel free to leave. We're going to leave the chat open for a little bit longer, just so you can leave comments. Please, you can leave messages of support for everyone on our panel, for Andre, for Eskom. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you to all our panelists for your time. Again, we know it's a Saturday night and you were still in curfew. So thank you very much for being with us. We do appreciate it. And just good luck. And the words from us, Andre, as well, is don't give up. Really don't give up. Please keep fighting the fight for us and keeping the lights on. And as Benji said, you have all of our full support. And thank you very much for all of your time. And just be well, be safe, and have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.